and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the School of the Arts and Architecture to the third in our UCLA Arts Distinguished Lecture Series. I want to begin by thanking Professor Barbara Drucker, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, for her work in conceptualizing the series and conceptualizing the series and bringing it to fruition, and Julia Carnahan, Program Assistant for Arts Education, for her help in getting the show on the road. Where's Julia? She's there somewhere. And also Professor Henry Lucas, Chair of the Department of Design Media Arts, for letting us use this fabulous space, AKA the EDA. Tonight's distinguished lecturer is the renowned director of opera, theater, film, and festivals, Professor Peter Sellars, and it's my honor to welcome him. Peter is one of the most innovative, powerful forces in the performing arts today. A visionary artist, activist, and teacher, he is known for groundbreaking interpretations of classic works. But the term classic, so often deployed as a synonym for authoritative cultural freeze-drying, has a different, very different, more dynamic, unstable, and humanistic resonance in Peter's worldview. From his vivid reimagining of the Sophocles via Handel drama Hercules, in which the work is used to activate a series of critical and still very relevant questions about the emotional toll of war, to a stunning contemporary staging of the great Kunju opera, Peony Pavilion, written by the 16th century Chinese playwright Tong Jiangsu, and a radical revisioning of Shakespeare's Othello from the point of view of its central female character, Desdemona, and the African woman who nurtured her. Peter Sellars has shown us again and again how the transcendental vantage of great art can help connect us with the cultural and emotional ground we walk on, how the particularities of diverse cultural expressions are bound up with the generalities of what used to be called human nature, how cracking open the stereotypes allows us to release the archetypes, how old torches may be reignited to cast light on problems that we imagine are new. Peter has played an indispensable role in bringing 20th century and contemporary opera to the stage, including works by Messiaen, Hindemith, and Ligeti. Inspired by the compositions of Kaya Sarajevo, Osvaldo Kolijov, and Tan Dun, Peter has guided the creation of productions of their work that have expanded and diversified the repertoire of modern opera. His longtime collaborative relationship with the composer John Adams has yielded a series of important works, including Nixon in China, The Death of Klinghoffer, El Nino, Dr. Atomic, and A Flowering Tree, and a staging of their latest collaboration, The Gospel According to the Other Mary, will tour the US and Europe later this year. Peter's recent projects have included a critically acclaimed, you okay? Critically acclaimed concert staging of Bach's St. Matthew Passion with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, and stagings of Nixon in China for the Metropolitan Opera, George Crumb's The Winds of Destiny for the Ojai Music Festival and Cal Performances, and new productions of Handel's Hercules in Chicago and Vivaldi's Griselda in Santa Fe. Desdemona, a collaboration with the Nobel Prize-winning novelist Toni Morrison and Malian composer and singer Rokia Traore, was performed in Vienna, Brussels, Paris, Berkeley, New York, and Berlin, and presented in London in 2012 as part of the Cultural Olympiad. That same year, Peter also staged a double bill of Tchaikovsky's Iolanta and Stravinsky's Persephone for Teatro Real in Madrid, and his staging of Tristan and Isolde for the Canadian Opera Company is currently running at the Four Seasons Center for the Performing Arts in Toronto. So if you all catch planes, you can get tickets, I think. Hey, Peter? Peter has curated several major arts festivals, including the visionary 1990 and 1993 Los Angeles festivals, the 2002 Adelaide Arts Festival in Australia, and the 2003 Venice Biennale International Festival of Theater. In 2006, he was artistic director of A New Crowned Hope, a month-long festival in Vienna where he invited a diverse array of international artists to create new works across a multiplicity of disciplines and genres to celebrate the 250th anniversary of Mozart's birth. Peter also holds day gigs as a professor in the Department of World Arts and Cultures and Dance at UCLA, woohoo, and resident curator of the Telluride Film Festival. He is the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship, the Erasmus Prize, the Sundance Institute Risk Takers Award, and the Gish Prize, and is also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Peter is a gifted and caring teacher, and his courses, Art as Moral Action and Art as Social Action, have impacted literally thousands of UCLA students since he began teaching them some 20 years ago. In my role as dean, I read a lot of student course evaluations, and I can tell you that Peters stand apart. Asked to assess the impact of his teaching, these young people write about personal transformation and the assumption of moral responsibility, about seeing the world outside the classroom with fresh eyes and new hope. In a recent manifesto arguing the case for a cabinet-level Secretary of Culture in the United States, Los Angeles, some of you saw it, yeah! Los Angeles Times critic Mark Swed, I realized I can't really see Peter while I'm embarrassing. This is not good. The monitor's in the right place. Los Angeles Times critic Mark Swed shared his list of criteria for the post. Ideally, he wrote, a Secretary of Culture should be a political outsider, able to function as a moral conscience. He or she would further serve as someone able to ask the hard questions, to see the world from possibly unexpected angles, and help prompt new solutions to old problems. As artists know, and politicians refuse to acknowledge, all you have to do to create change is change your mind. And whom did Mr. Swed nominate for this august, though regrettably still unlikely to materialize position? Peter Sellars, of course. In his early days, when Peter staged a puppet theater version of The Ring Cycle, threw Antony and Cleopatra into a Harvard swimming pool, and took over the American National Theater at the tender age of 26, he was frequently and not always amicably characterized as an enfant terrible. No longer l'enfant, he remains terrible. Please join me in a warm welcome for our UCLA colleague, Professor Peter Sellars.
Hey everyone. Wow, it's shocking. There are way more people here than I thought. May I just propose anyone who wants to come down to the front. I mean, there are very high-level VIP seats. Anybody who's a VIP should really be sitting here, right? So everybody should sit in these 5 seats. Because tonight, I really want to use tonight as a working session. And I want us all to figure some stuff out together. Because obviously the most interesting things are figured out by groups of people, and the most important knowledge is knowledge that's developed and held by communities. And we have a pretty astonishing group of people in the room tonight. Some people I've known for many, many years, some people who have been my dearest mentors, some people who have been my great examples, some people who I have learned who I am from. And I want to honor those people tonight. And of course, there are a bunch of people who I don't yet know also here. We'll figure that out. But before I go one more step, I do want to thank Chris Waterman, because we go all the way back and all the way forward. And I really want to thank Barbara Drucker for, first of all, this incredible program in the Visual and Performing Arts Education program that really insists that the main action in the universe happens off of the UCLA campus. I know, it's a shocking idea, but that lack of selfishness and that sense that there's a larger world and that we're actually part of that world, and it's our job to inform that world and to be informed by it is really a great example. So Barbara, more power to you and more power to your program. Thank you. Thank you. Tonight, really simply put, I would like to imagine at the ripe age that I've become, it's time to make something new. And I think UCLA is the place to do it. And I want, with a group of people, to found a new institute at UCLA. And the first founding group is in this room. And I would like for us together to talk through what needs to be done. And can we make a structure that helps do some of it? Right now, we're at a very extreme place for education, a very extreme place for civil society, and we're at a public university. And I love the word public. And the word public in public university does mean that extremely high-paid and distinguished professors should go into rooms and do research, and nobody should ever hear from them again. But it also means public. And we should actually, our job is not just to educate students. Our job is to educate, inform, and engage the public. We're in a period where the public is no longer an acceptable term because we're in the period of the private. And UCLA has, by a kind of amazing vision, now placed itself in the top tier of fundraising universities in America, raising as much money as Harvard and Yale, because to keep the idea of a public university alive in a period of privatization, you have to raise more money than a private university. And can I really honor, oh my God, it's dramatic, Lucas. Better mic. Is this a better mic? Oh God, can you believe it? Okay. The reprisals will begin later as my conspiracy theories go into high gear. The idea that in fact we have to raise a lot of money just to remain public, just to remain open, and just to remain part of the society and not be part of the culture of privilege, but to actually insist that the vision of this country is that every human being is equal. And how do we deepen that equality? How do we recognize it? How do we realize it? How do we extend it? And how do we insist upon it? This country was hijacked 30 years ago by a massive gesture of privatization. And we went from, when Ronald Reagan took office, being the world's largest creditor nation to being the world's largest debtor nation. Everything that worked in America was shut down, and everything that didn't work was augmented. So in our lifetimes, while the iPhone was being invented, we have tripled world poverty. In our lifetimes, we've created poverty that never existed in this country and reinforced it. And of course, in the state of California, starting in 1984, we built more prisons than Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin put together. That is the legacy of our generation. In order to run these prisons, which were very expensive, where we really are willing to spend $65,000 a year to incarcerate and incapacitate a young person from a certain neighborhood, rather than spend $3,000 a year to educate or empower them. We have all the money in the world when it's necessary to hurt someone, and we have no money left when it's necessary to help them. Or even not help. Simply, do we believe in education? Do we believe that every human being actually has skills, talents, vision, and a contribution to make? The nightmare is we've created standardized testing, which exactly removes people's individual qualities from consideration. Standardization is the great unequalizer, because in standardized forms, nobody's equal because it just has to do with what standard you're judging things by. You know, the test is administered, all the people who have spiky hair do very well. What did that do for everyone else? Not a lot, because you just decided spiky hair or growing up within a wealthy California suburb would mean you do well on a test. What does it mean that, in fact, the basis of our equality is difference? What makes us equal is that we're different. What makes us equal is each of us can contribute something that no one else can contribute. That's what makes us equal. And so education based on standardization is an idea thought up by a very drunk and angry Joseph Stalin on a bad night. It's the preparation for fascism, where the next generation of students has already been told, you will be valued and credentialed based on your ability to repeat back what we told you. What that does for creativity, what that does for new ideas, what that does for critical thinking, what that does for anyone who might have an alternate viewpoint, is to eliminate them. This is a recipe for fascism. And in fact, in 30 years, we have managed to create out of the world's most dynamic democracy the new feudalism. A super wealthy, tiny elite, and everyone else serves. And the middle class officially eliminated from view. And where people are simply desperate and grateful to have work. And no other questions will be asked. Now that's an amazing thing that just happened in my lifetime. That's not going back, that's just starting in 1980. So my attitude is, if that happened between then and now, it's time to start the reverse movement. The World Bank, of course, enforced these principles all over the world, way before 1980. And it's how we went in and made an economic model in Brazil, in Angola, in, most of the quote-unquote developing world, was to make sure it would never develop, because what we believe in is the economic validity of slave labor. And we actually admire slavery and encourage it whenever possible, which is why our policy is to strip from the budget of every African or South American country education, health, and social welfare. So people are not empowered, people are not independent, and people cannot stand on their own feet. Now that ideology has, of course, revisited and come back as a revenge to the United States. And this idea that you prefer slave labor and you you think economic advancement is actually having a population of serfs, may I just say is simply wrong. And the United States has actually been a really important place that proved that wrong by actually being founded. And by painfully working through those issues. Having a lot more issues to work through. But when I was growing up, it was a commonplace, when people were looking at the history of art or the history of music, to say, oh, you don't want to chart one line of progress. That's actually a bad way to look at all of history. Well, we've learned that the hard way, because this is not progress. We've actually regressed in my lifetime on the face of the earth, very seriously. We do have the iPhone, which compares favorably with the Egyptian pyramids as, the absolute emblem of a society and its magnificent technological and spiritual achievement. So I do not want to in any way undercut the iPhone, no matter, what kind of slave labor actually assembles it. The high-level work that's done in California, I admire. But the future of slavery, I don't admire. And are we educating a population of future serfs? And consumers, consumer serfs, serf/consumers, who simply take orders and obey what the advertising tells them to do? One of the most shocking things for me about living in America and teaching at a university is the things that we talk about at a university and that are going on at high levels across the university, in sciences, in social sciences, in public policy, are not related to the America I live in. Most people's lives have yet to be affected by the advances that are taking place in this university. There's a huge gulf between what people vote for and why they vote and what they think they're voting for, and the actual research, fact gathering, and care that characterizes what people at this university are studying and how they're studying it and how they're collating their results. For me, the disparity between what, quote unquote, most Americans think and what is moving at the highest levels of research is shattering and does feel, again, quite medieval, and feels like a medieval culture, in China or anywhere else where there are these tiny little zones of learning and knowledge and the rest of the society lives as serfs. For me, the project that I would like to place before you tonight is about the public face of this public university and insisting that this university has a role to play in shaping public awareness, and that is our role. And that our role is not about the students who are enrolled here. Yes, that's one role. I think there are 3 official things UCLA is supposed to do, right? What are they? Teaching, research, my favorite, and? Service. Okay, that third one, huh? Funky. What bizarre, dead-in-the-water, old-fashioned era did they write those things in? Service? How do you spell that? Okay, so... You mean self-service, right? Okay, good. Just checking. Okay. Move to the head of the line. Okay. We are the elite, thank God. Okay, so just want to clarify some things. Okay, good. So tonight, what I really want to talk about and talk with you about, and I'd like us all to really contribute to this conversation. I'll lay out a few things and then let's go for it. I would like to propose that, in fact, what's missing from American society at the moment, of course, are the arts. And that's by design. As the prisons were built, the music was eliminated from the schools, the art training, anything that, went into that direction. Now, all of us who are here and interested in the arts were hell-bent on somehow doing it ourselves. But in fact, it was removed from the national diet. Now, if you remove the humanities from a society, what you get is a society that is less humane. In fact, that ceases to be humane. That's cruel. And that really has no problem executing cruel deeds. That thinks torture is okay. You just have to do it sometimes. That thinks it's fine to incarcerate 1/3 of the African American population. We don't have a problem with that. No great culture can be built on mass injustice. And right now, we're living with so much organized mass injustice. The deportations that are going on every night of perfectly innocent people, not in Germany in 1937, in the United States right now. Breaking down the door in the middle of the night, taking people away in their pajamas and handcuffs, putting them in a prison in Texas where they can talk to no one, and deporting them without access to a lawyer, to a country they haven't been in for 30 years or they don't even speak the language. That's ongoing right now. Tonight, SWAT teams are breaking in to the homes of immigrants and deporting them. In your name and my name. Now you can just go about your life and just say, we'll ignore that. We're not going to pay attention to who's being deported and who's on the trains and who's being forced into those plane seats and handcuffed into the seat. And you can say that just doesn't concern me because I need to make a living. But that kind of smells like some previous moments in history that are not very attractive, frankly. And of course, we're in a situation where exactly we've stopped thinking about a future because we're too panicked about the present. Everybody's trying to get through the day, trying to just earn enough money to survive. And so you're not asking big future questions. And in fact, very impressively, in 30 years, utopian thinking has been eliminated from this country entirely. Now, America without idealism, America with no utopian thinking, is not America. And particularly targeting people who have everything to gain and making sure those are the very people who are disenfranchised. And really targeting them for total disenfranchisement, systematically. These are not bad luck cases, these are systemic, organized programs to incapacitate huge segments of the population. Now, why would in a democracy people vote for this state of affairs which is so self-mutilating, so depressing, so dispiriting, so ghastly? Because of a Willie Horton ad. You know, that was Reagan's successor, the older Mr. Bush, put an ad on television with a picture of a black man who had been paroled in Massachusetts and then raped someone later. And that ad was what was behind, of course, slightly a few years before Richard Nixon's great invention of the drug war, which was to take a segment of the population and criminalize them, and to create a way of thinking about a certain set of people. That means these people are have less than full rights, and that we can tell ourselves that they're not fully human, and therefore not worry that they're not going to be treated as human. The drug war was a race-neutral way of organizing mass arrests in specifically racial neighborhoods. The same amount of black people and white people and brown people and white people and Asian people and white people have drugs, consume drugs, but the ones who are arrested are people of color, which the prison populations reflect. It was a highly organized, targeted way of preventing the next America from appearing. Of saying we only want the America that's in place now, and the America that's on the way we do not want to see, and we're going to prevent it, and therefore the drug war was organized to roll back the civil rights movement by Richard Nixon. And then has gone way beyond anything he could have dreamt of in terms of a global, incredible global repressive action. And obviously, you know, what does more damage in somebody's life? Some white powder in a bag or 25-year life sentence where a mother never touches her children and her children will never touch their mother. Where's the damage? What's the largest damage? And of course the damage that we're doing is generational, i.e. it passes on to each generation, because each generation of parents that grew up without, children that grew up without parents, and each generation of parents that were not allowed to love their children. You're doing damage that goes across the centuries. And just like the stolen generations in Australia, the idea that we have clinically figured out to separate parents and children, which is of course the single most important human bond in anyone's life, and a whole segment of the population will never know their parents, and a whole segment of the population will never know their children, which is a recipe for permanent violence and despair. So all of which is just to say I don't want to, we have to address this stuff. We know it's there. It's lurking there every day. With one little eye, you kind of know it's there, but then we go about what we do every day and we don't really address it. And it's all because of this Willie Horton ad that uses an image of somebody and a single line that's not representative but claims to be representative. In every culture, there's something known as the evil eye, which means if you look at somebody with a certain type of evil in your mind and in your heart, it is an act of violence. And we're pretty much under the influence of the evil eye, not being able to see our fellow citizens with any degree of clarity, understanding, or recognition. White supremacy refuses to die. White supremacy will do anything rather than die. The idea that white people are simply entitled to more forever and have the right to steal from everyone else, and everyone else will be prosecuted maximally for the tiniest little crimes of stealing chocolate chip cookies and a set of golf clubs, and it's 25 years to life in California. While we are systematically taking everything from everyone else in the world on our terms. Now, how long is that going to continue? When I said the next America in the name of this talk tonight, I want to talk about, can we get to a future? Can we imagine a future? Step one is imagining the future. Step one is imagination. That's why the arts exist, is there needs to be a space for imagination. You have to get past what's in front of you, and you have to imagine something else. What is the act of imagining something that's not already in front of you? That's what we do as artists, is, you know, you start with that blank page, and then there's a drawing. You start with empty space, and there's a melody and some music. You actually place something that's not yet visible. And of course, once you make that drawing, it's like it was always there. And it becomes part of everyone's mental landscape and furniture. And in fact, what we do as artists is change people's habit energies, right? Habit energies are the things that you do without thinking. Not the things you have to stop and think about, but the things you just do without thinking. And that's where culture comes into play, right? Because culture is actually the place people's habit energies change. If people decide to consume differently, it's because of culture, right? If I can take thrilling example for a moment, just very quickly, of, say, the internet and the new movement in community-supported agriculture, right? Everybody knows what I'm talking about, but I just want to say that, right? That's where you can connect to a farm and work directly with the farmer, and every week fresh vegetables are delivered to you, and you and your kids can go out at harvest time, and instead of being, you know, in the city and having no connection to what you're eating and having no connection to the earth, you can actually have a very direct connection, not go through a giant supermarket chain, and actually have something that has not been poisoned or is not poisonous to the earth. And you'll be eating it. Community-supported agriculture, and you enter into a direct relationship with your supplier, or, as we now have increasingly with the internet, you know, you can choose to be in solidarity, you know, with the movement in Chiapas. You can choose to contribute to women in a village in North India who have always done a certain type of dyeing, and you can get their cloth directly from them and support what they're doing. And so what we can do now is redirect ourselves as consumers to actually redirect our money to places and activities that we are in solidarity with. So that is the beginning of the end of the Industrial Revolution, right? Which was all about mass production, mass marketing, and the masses. And we're actually at the beginning, at the cusp of actually moving away from mass and saying, no, I actually want this small farm in Central California to be the place where I have my vegetables from. And I want to support those 5 people, which is extremely radical. And the idea that we're at the cusp of a new economy, that the old economy keeps collapsing every 2 years, try and patch it together and it collapses all over again, because it just doesn't work and hasn't worked for a long time for most people. So the question is, what will work for most people? And that's what the job of artists is can we ask ourselves questions that are not being asked otherwise? But more importantly, can we as artists now stop simply making art that is about art? And can we come back to the call of art across history, which is to have content? And that content to be spiritual, organizational, but also about life questions and how to live and life choices. So what I'm proposing is an institute here at UCLA that is focused on content, that takes the larger issues that are being misrepresented every single day across America, in the media, the poisonous images that actually control the way people vote, every damn Hollywood cop show that, again, written by people living in their pink Beverly Hills mansions about South Central Los Angeles. And could we actually begin to show what television does not do and what most journalism does not do? Who lives in America now? How they're living, what they're thinking. Not who used to live in America, who lives here right now. Could I actually see in a Hollywood movie reflected the population? No. And most people are voting because they see those images. And those images have allowed them to outlive their own period of history. Because those images are seriously deficient and time dated. And they're controlling the voting patterns in a democracy. The question is to counter the Willie Horton image in reverse, is to actually create a set of images that are representative. In fact, we've gone to a lot of trouble to make sure that they're representative. And they represent not only people's faces, but people's thoughts, people's hope, and the things people are afraid of. That we can actually articulate that for each other. What I love is, the election debates, where not one thing that was of importance was allowed to be said. We've created a situation where anything important is not allowed to be on the agenda. Now, the advantage of the arts is that actually they thrive in controversy. What we do is create controversy. What we do is create an issue. What we do is create a place people have to talk about, people have to discuss, people have to have an opinion. And what we can also do as artists is have a certain radicalism that actually just puts something in place and then lets people talk about it. So there's actually something to respond to, but a working example of something to respond to. So you're not just responding ideologically, because we're actually creating a working model, which is what the arts do over and over again, is create a working model of a social situation. Now, just to take a quick example, that's easy because Chris said, I worked on the 250th birthday of Mozart in Vienna, but for me, one of my favorite things about Mozart, and I'll just do this quick, but Mozart and Haydn were members of the same Masonic lodge in Vienna as Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, right? It moved all the way around Europe, in Paris and so on. And the Masons were the ones who were preparing democracy in Europe. And of course, a lot of the United States, is just completely Masonic symbol, Masonic symbol, Masonic symbol, right? $1 bill. It's all right. Okay, duh. Anyway, these people, the American Revolution was really shocking and amazing in Europe because it insisted that all people were equal. Now, Europe had no previous model or example of that. None. None. It was incredibly radical. And there was no such thing as democracy in Europe. There was only autocracy. There were emperors and kings, and the occasional queen and empress. And the Masons were also behind the French Revolution. So in Vienna, where Mozart and Haydn lived, if you even wrote a letter with some of these ideas, you would be subject to arrest and interrogation. So that's why in Mozart's letters none of this stuff shows up. But what Mozart and Haydn did was they would go twice a week to these political meetings and say, okay, we've got to make some art that demonstrates this stuff. People are equal. How do we demonstrate that? And what they did was they invented something called the string quartet. They actually created a musical form. And Mozart in opera created a musical form that insisted on human equality. That in a string quartet, it's not 3 people accompanying the soloist. It's an exchange of ideas held by the group. And if any one person is missing, the entire thing collapses. And it was insisting that everyone is an equal part of that group. And everyone has a part to play, and it's absolutely indissoluble. And then Mozart took that idea one step further in his operas, and in the Marriage of Figaro created these ensembles where 6 or 4 or 8 people would sing at the same time, and they were of different social levels. So someone who had a lot of money was singing at the same time as someone who had no money, and they were singing the same musical material as equals. So there's just and then one generation later there was democracy in Europe. But it takes artists first to place something in people's imagination that can later become a political reality. The unthinkable has to be thought. And that's what artists do, is make a place for everything people can't imagine now. We have to make a place to imagine that. We've come through a period in history of art where art has been highly self-absorbed. Obviously, I don't want to make a blanket case. Right now, the current generation and lots of people in this room are making really exciting, involved, engaged art, and thank you and congratulations. But I would just say none of us are in deep enough discussions with people who are not artists. And for me, what I'm proposing for Institute at UCLA is that we create an institute that places artists in dialogue with high-level scholars and activists from other fields. That across a 3 or 4 year trajectory, chooses subject matter, invites key artists from around the world and key scholars and activists to assemble here and to create a new body of work that begins to create a new vocabulary to deal with these issues. Because we're right now using vocabulary that is time dated, right? In the Middle East, you can no longer use the words freedom or democracy. Those words have been destroyed for a generation. What words will you use? What is the vocabulary now that we have tainted so much of the rhetoric of progressive democracy by disappointing people so deeply all over the world for a generation? What is a new vocabulary? Well, I would suggest that that new vocabulary will come from new Americans, from a whole range of cultures, not simply from Mozart and Haydn in Vienna, not simply from Thomas Jefferson and his friends in London, and not simply from reimagining the Greeks. But the next America is going to be about reimagining the Mayans, is going to be about reimagining the planet. And we're going to take our cultural references and our vocabularies, not just from a narrow range of sources. And we're going to evolve our life choices from a whole range of cultural perspectives. The question is how those conversations and working relationships create a new body of knowledge, and that body of knowledge has a form as artworks that enter the culture and that become part of the culture. And what we're talking about is these key ideas becoming part of the culture, a culture, an ongoing part of people's culture. I know I'm from wax, so the word culture is weird to say in the singular. Let me just say cultures in the interest of diversity and difference. But also, what I'm trying to do is get at the fact that the university is the place to convene key people from around the world and around the university, and have people who specialize in the university within the university reach across disciplinary lines and begin to create something that would have a public identity, a public face, and public responsibility. Now that's a new one for many artists who are not very responsible individuals. And what does it mean to actually place that task directly for artists and say, no, this is actually a task in your generation? Is we also have to be responsible for what is happening. Not on the sidelines, not on the periphery, but responsible in the center. Now, when I say not on the sidelines and not on the periphery, obviously the point about the future is planning the future, imagining the future, shaping the future, is the best way to see the future is to actually, for the first time, look very clearly at the present, which is what we're not very good at. How clearly and in what detail can you see the present? But also, for me, it's a question of solidarity, because the future is the people whose time has not yet come. That's the future. The future of the people who've been disappointed again and again and again and again. And the future belongs to the people whose time has not yet come, rather than the people whose time is up. Hello. And so when you're doing your work, when you're actively working with people who are, quote, not heard, not seen, not yet on the radar, et cetera, whose radar, God knows, who even built that radar? What is that radar? You are actually shaping the future. Because these are people who have, for generations, yearned for self-expression and yearned for justice. And in responding to those two things, you're shaping a future. Questions of justice, of course, are eliminated from American discussion every day because justice would involve some sacrifice, because a whole lot of things we're standing on are not just. So how do you take people into that place of sacrifice? That needs to be very powerful art. That is something that you don't see on TV, and it's something you don't read in magazines, because everything is about your self-aggrandizement. And what does it mean to talk to people about what it means to give up, shift, and sacrifice? How do you create that space? And how can you find the right balance between scholars who are moving carefully with precision and artists who also understand impulse, wildness, the irrational, Because again, as human beings, we're mostly irrational. We would like to be rational. We tell ourselves, well, we tell other people that we're rational. But in fact, we are highly irrational beings, which is why the cultural fields can tell you something that the psychology department can't, or can tell it to you in another way. And then finally, simply the fact is all of us are going to have to live and act and behave and negotiate culturally and collaboratively. So in fact, there needs to be cultural understanding, obviously, in the business school, in the medical school. The role in which culture plays in wellness, the way in which culture plays in exchange. These are all crucial dimensions of cultural understanding. Mutual recognition, ability to hear each other, ability to talk about and understand extremely difficult things about each other and ourselves. My feeling is that education is in a complete crisis in the arts, in the sense that I really do feel, I was at least trained, and I think a lot of the artists I admire were trained in a tradition of apprenticeship, where you apprentice yourself to an artist you admire, and across that span, it changes your life. You begin to recognize things. You also have your differences. That's very stormy and exciting. But you learn craft, but you also learn a moral dimension, and you learn how to be. And for me, arts education, the education of artists, actually needs to involve artists in direct, serious projects. And so what I propose, again, is here at UCLA we create an institute which is a collaborative gathering of people for 3 to 5 year periods. And graduate students are attracted to work with the individuals involved and the subject matter, and are present as part of the project. The project itself generates course materials, courses, also generates literature, a whole range of writing, a whole range of commentary. And as you're developing new vocabulary, all of that needs to be explained to the world and discussed. So there's a lot of research also around simply the presentation of the research and what it means when that research enters the public sphere. And what are those strategies? The ultimate goal would be to gradually build major conferences around each project cycle, so that if we are taking on the drug war across 4 years and actually assembling the weight of evidence of from international relations, what it means when you defoliate someone's country, from anthropology, what it means in cultures where taking drugs is not antisocial but profoundly social path towards spiritual understanding. The law enforcement perspective, which we've seen plenty of, but now increasingly key law enforcement people are refusing to prosecute drug cases. Of course, neuroscience, chemistry, what is really going on in your brain? Public policy. By the time you took every department in the university and had them deal with the drug war, English, right? Most of English literature is written by people on drugs. You know, And you actually create a 360-degree view of a phenomenon from an incredible range of perspectives. And rather than the flattening out that we get in media presentations of these issues, you finally have a dimensionality that reflects the nature of the question. And by insisting on a diversity of voices being represented, we begin to get towards the negotiated truth that is the truth we're going to arrive at altogether. That is to say, we have to learn truth as a negotiation, not simply as a statement. And so to me, these collaborative working groups are really essential as model of negotiated truth. And for the training of working artists, of young working artists, that process of negotiation and engagement to arrive at a truth, it's not just your truth, that's not enough. It has to also include a lot of other truth. Now that negotiation is complex, and it's a negotiation many artists are not skilled at or willing to engage. And I would say it's actually the skill for the next generation or 50. And that is absolutely essential. Does everyone get the picture so far? So I have the most cool people in one room. And does that make sense? Does it make sense? Please, tell us your name. Ken, I know that. I'm just for everyone else.
My name is Ken Marsh, and what I want to inject in what you've said is the collaboration of students not yet in college. I'm working in high school as a volunteer.
Thank you.
For everything you're talking about is so great there, and that's the culture that's coming. If you don't have those people in the room, you're wasting your time.
Right. Obviously, we all stopped being cool as soon as we left high school. And high school is where it's happening, and I couldn't agree more, and thank you. And that's why I started the evening thanking Barbara for her programs, which make sure UCLA is in high schools all over the city, K through 12, but I also like high schools. But for me, just to say yes, high school students, yes, youth, yes. Thank you, Ken, absolutely. And that is a crucial component. And again, what the Confucius Institute is also involved with, thank God.
In this way, you create the idea of a real university, which is maybe the future way of viewing our society. It's a constant learning factory, if you want to call it. I hate that word. But
Well, again, can I just say, it's about using the privilege of being at UCLA very creatively, right? And recognizing how do you share privilege, how do you reorient privilege, how do you redirect privilege, how do you use what privilege can accomplish in a whole range of ways, right? And again, as you know from high school, privilege is definitely a high school thing because only high school students understand how cool they are and are doing the next cool thing next to which we are so uncool it's beyond belief. So if you're also searching for coolness, again, in cultures and subcultures, that is the deal. And until high school students sign off on it, you're dead in the you're dead meat, right? Totally, yes. Yes. Please. Oh my God, Lucas.
Oh, thank you. I also think the quarter system is the enemy of reflective thought.
The quarter system has to die the death. Yeah, no, the quarter system is simply about collecting tuition and keeping that fabulous turnstile going. Again, I think we're going to be in an interesting question about, as you know, my obsession is removing quantification as part of education. Because to me, we're in a society that is catastrophically focused on quantity and has absolutely lost all track of quality. And that is truly suicide. and the idea that your education is primarily based on quantity and is all measured numerically and is just outrageous. And so to create a space in an education system that is not measured that way, and where that is not the yardstick, thank you very, very, very much. That is absolutely crucial. And again, to me, the ideas and the skill and the commitment will be tested by its presence in the real world. And to me, that is a important yardstick. Either, and believe me, I also really value failure. Maybe I'll say one word about the failure story. Because tonight I really want us to name this institute. Could people be thinking of names? Because that would help a lot. One of my favorite names is the Boethius Institute, but that's a little obscure. So I probably won't use it. But does everyone know who Boethius is? No. Can I just say, while you're thinking of a name for the institute, let me just tell you a quick story about Boethius, right? Boethius is one of my favorite guys. He was in the 5th century. There you go. That's the deal. And he was a moral philosopher who also wrote 6 volumes of philosophy of music. And he was doing the complicated cultural question of how to take Christianity and Roman culture and Greek culture and not make them contradict each other. Once Rome became Christian, there was a lot of work to do to figure out all the things that had previously been evil and unthinkable were now perfect and thinkable. The Christians were the people who used to arrest and feed to the wolves and bears and other things. And so lions, thank you. And now all that had to be the new, yes, we love that. And meanwhile, all the Greek things that people had grown up with could not be just jettisoned. They had to now become Christian in some way or not contradict. So it was an incredibly delicate cultural project that Boethius had to undertake. In any case, he was a really outstanding philosopher, and these books are really beautiful. Just to say, he also, in 5th century Rome, things got really, I think the famous word is decadent. Nothing like what we've got going on in America, but still, it was bad. And the basic thing is the emperors, everything was so despicable, shoddy, and tainted that somebody had this idea of saying, hey, for the current emperor, how about if we get as the new chief of staff a really great philosopher who people look up to? I think I've got this guy Boethius's phone number. So they called him up, and he was very touched. And he said, oh, my God, you're really thinking that I should be chief of staff here? That's incredible. A moral philosopher would be chief of staff here in the White House? And they said, yep, that's what we want. Please come right on over to the office. So he came. And his first week, he was attending staff meetings, and they were discussing things, and he had a lot of issues. He said, oh, you really shouldn't actually take these people's homes away from them. That would not be just. And it became really clear having a moral philosopher in staff meetings was really a drag, because he was having a problem with lots of things. And it just was not a good way to take care of business. So after a while, it was awkward that they had invited him, and they had to get rid of him. So there was this kind of slightly awkward moment, and then they said, fine, let's just jail him and put him in the dungeon and make it the lowest dungeon that no light ever gets into, and no one will ever hear from him ever again, and that will be over, and it was a little mistake, but we need not discuss it any further. So there he was in this really extreme dungeon, and in fact, he was still alive. That was irritating. So finally, they just sent some people down with giant clubs, and they beat him to death and smashed him into putty. But before that happened, while he was in that dungeon, somebody had, smuggled in toilet paper or something, and he wrote in that dungeon his last work, which is called The Consolation of Philosophy. And it's one of my favorite works. And in this work, the goddess philosophy walks through the walls of his cell and sits down next to him on his little cot. And they start singing songs together about justice. The first songs, she's a little harsh with him. She said, having a problem complaining about your fate, think this is unfair. You had no problem when you were at the top. You're just upset now that you're at the bottom, but it's the same wheel. So if you're supporting the wheel up here, you've got to support it down there. Stop complaining. Whew. Anyway, as the constellation philosophy continues, it goes on and becomes this incredible vision of the cosmos and the harmony of the planets and gigantic notions of justice that are in the natural world. And it's a very beautiful book. And of course, nobody who was alive during his lifetime read it. But what is kind of cool is 5 centuries later, in the medieval period, it became the most copied manuscript in Europe. And 15 centuries later, in our own period of blazing darkness, it is the only book written in the 5th century that is available in paperback. And you can get it at an airport. So I like Boethius just because it is about certain ideas actually having long lives. And certain things that in one moment of history are being destroyed actively are actually being prepared for a later generation and are actually going to come back at strength and are actually going to have much more power. And of course, as artists, we're trained to think long-term, not short-term. We don't need anyone to vote for us. We're not running for office. And we work thinking of the 7th generation. We work thinking 200 years from now, 400 years from now, 500 years from now. Like, what is the long-term thinking? Not what is convenient this afternoon. And can we articulate things in that span that have, and also obviously what we do is going back equally, because we're also responsible for the fact that the ancestors are in the room, and the ancestors need to be heard, and the ancestors need to speak. Can I do that again? The ancestors need to speak, and the ancestors need to be heard. And that's also our job as artists, is to make sure those voices are present. Yeah. That was Boethius being taken to the basement. So, any names? Yes, Rebecca, any other thoughts?
I'm at a point in my life where I think the simplest idea is the best. The Institute for Change.
Oh my God, the Institute for Change!
And I have another thing I'd like to say since I have the mic.
Sure.
When you were talking earlier about judging things by quantity or judging things by quality, if you were to make the change over to judging things by quality, what would that mean and what would that look like, since we don't have a lot of examples of that to go by? What's the new landscape?
Do people hear that? That's beautiful. Thank you. Again, for me, one of the most important things is to create a model of community-held knowledge and community-held values that are negotiated. And to me, the interest is the range of people in the room and how deep the negotiation has to go to arrive at something that a range of people respect as having quality. And so for me, making those smaller working models is really, really important, because I think what we can do as artists is work collaboratively and give it image to the world of what it means to work collaboratively, what it means to create more representative groupings than we usually see in the world. And again, the negotiation process of that. I think what we do in the arts, again, is always create a small scale hypothetical version of something, and we test it. And we test it in extreme conditions, so that it then is useful as a model for later generations, or in the next 20 years or 10 years, to be applied in larger formats. But I think quality is always a great thing, right? Because a handful of people decided that this Indian raga is totally beautiful 8 centuries ago. Now it's everywhere. A handful of people decided that Leonardo drawing was pretty good. Now it exists as part of what we identify as quality, right? I was always in the arts. There's a handful of people engaged who are really insisting on a certain level of quality that actually does reach across time in important ways. That would be my first proposal. Does that make sense? Other questions? Should we go back here and then here?
I don't like this question. No, no. I don't like this question, but when this entity grows and thrives and these people grow, eventually the university will approach you and it would like you. You're so lovable. You're social caring. But Monsanto, GE, Exxon are threatening to withdraw their millions of dollars in this university. You're going to have to ask me to shut up. I know you've thought of this. I know you have. It's a dark cloud, and it keeps us all up at night. I'm curious about how you deal with that.
Well, I think one of the most important things is really simple, is never, ever, 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 ever confuse money with freedom, confuse money with thought, confuse money with value, confuse money with anything other than money. And so, you know, as an artist, what we do every day is not focused on money. It's really goes in the opposite direction. And I think the most important movements in history, I mean, Gandhi made one of the most important movements in history with the poorest people on earth. And so, to me, the effectiveness of something doesn't have to do with the money. We've all been absolutely hoodwinked into thinking until we can hire one of the big Washington PR firms, none of this is going to go anywhere. And it's really quite the opposite. That is the strategy of the era that is fading. And I would just say Exxon is not here forever, and Monsanto's share prices have fallen so deeply in the last 2 years with the failure of Roundup that Monsanto may not be in business in 5 years. So just to say no, and also as soon as we really do move, as we have to move from fossil fuels, ExxonMobil, please. You know, as soon as you just do not agree to the conditions of slavery and servitude, you are free. And as long as you set yourself up by those conditions, you are a slave. And I think, you know, education has happened with and without money in lots of forms over the years. And I don't really want to confuse money with why we're here. Now, the dream of a public university, of course, is that it's funded by the state. And it's been a while since we've seen that. Nonetheless, I would emphasize the fundraising here at UCLA is quite impressive from individuals and from enlightened individuals. And that will be one of the things that, you know, at its best and its worst, reflects the tradition of the court arts. Of, again, a handful of people who care for the highest quality and will fund it. You know, and that's an essential part of the history of art, right, is that somebody actually funded those incredible illuminated Qurans, you know, made with a brush with a single human hair and gold leaf. You know, somebody said, no, this is important, we'll keep this going. So let's say that it will keep going. Over there. Oh, here first and then over in the corner.
I've been an admirer of Boethius for about 65 years.
Wow.
So I like that name. But I think one very important thing to keep in mind is probably every single child born has a potential to do some kind of work of art or life work of art, whatever you might say. Over and over again, I have run across parents who said, when my child went to school, she or he lost the ability to make these drawings or this music or whatever it was. The school system really does seem to take it out of kids. And over again, I've run across situations where one illustration, a young man I hired who had been in prison, he couldn't get a job any other way. He had a problem with anger. He had almost killed somebody. Anyway, I hired him and worked with him, and he eventually became my assistant for a period of time, doing sculpture, casting, and so on.
Battery's dead. How exciting. Go.
Okay, he responded to my question, had he ever been interested in art. He said when he was in, I think, 6th or 7th grade, that was his big passion, was drawing. And he had wanted to take art courses. This was a black guy. And his teacher, advisor, whoever, said no, that he should not take art courses because he could never expect to get employment as an artist. He said that when she denied him those art courses, that was the first time he felt this kind of consuming rage come over him. Anyway, while he worked with me, his talent really began to come out. Eventually, he did end up killing somebody, but...
Let me just make two quick points. One is there's a lot of work to do. A lot of things have been destroyed in our lifetime, and we're going to take a long time to build them all back. Or the way I prefer to think of it, I want to focus on things that were never good. There was no golden age ever, and make the first things that are good in that area. So for me, that's I want to really move without nostalgia, and I want to move only towards things that were never fair, never correct, never done in a satisfying or accurate way, and just say, now it's our task to move there. But just to say, what I imagine this institute is doing is working in a certain way for the next decade or 15 years or whatever, at a certain level, almost low to the ground, so that when the pendulum moves back, as it will in America, and we believe in public works again, and we believe in progressive legislation, the things that we pioneer can become part of the new legislation, can become part of the new set of understood and accepted values, because we've demonstrated their utility, we've demonstrated their functionality, and we've demonstrated that in complex situations. So that, for me, one of the tasks is to create a working laboratory where we can test all that stuff and generate a body of work that could, 20 years from now, really have a large public life. That's our hope, you know. Yes, Norman.
Or is that? I don't want to take the conversation backwards, but I was a little unsatisfied with the specificity of your response about the questions of quantity and quality, and especially how those function in a university setting and in relation to students and teachers or students and departments and so on. One of the things I appreciated about the Dean's introduction is he talked about almost kind of radical response that students have had to the experience of your course over the years. And I think part of that is rooted in the sort of radical notion that you have of how quality is assessed in that course. And it seems to me, although the mechanisms obviously have to be different, there's a kind of philosophy at work that logically would sort of translate into this new enterprise. And so I was wondering if, for the people in the room who aren't familiar with it, if you can talk for just a minute about upending some of those preconceived notions of grading and qualitative assessment and so on, because in fact your class has been a kind of laboratory for that over, well, 15, almost 20 years now.
Wow, he's calling me out on this. Before I do that, let me just mention one more thing, which is, again, by shifting the educational process to project orientation, rather than tests or, abstract evaluation, to me, the project itself and the ethos of the project, the ethics of the project, the moral energy of the project, the moral energy of participation, and the way in which a community itself enforces and sustains commitment is, to me, the issue. And it's not about you as an individual rising or falling. It's actually about how skilled you are working within a community and recognizing how the community functions and functioning within that, in which all of us fall and the community carries us, or all of us are busy carrying someone else. And that, so it's not about your personal trajectory of being good or bad. It has to do with, across a lifespan, all of us have our moments where we are flowering and other moments when we're in withdrawal or retreat. And a community ethos sustains that. And that's, for me, very, very, very powerful. So when I speak about knowledge held by communities and in communities and developed in a communal way, that for me is really essential. Now, what Norman is getting at is, of course, and there are many people in the room who can testify to this fact, my large course, the Art as Moral Action, Art as Social Action class here at UCLA, everybody gets an A, except for 10 really horrifying people. And because they were so horrible, they get a B. And that's the lowest grade I've ever given in my life, because I, first of all, believe that if you're doing anything for a grade, you've missed everything in life. Like, that is already to show that you don't understand life at all. You give your best and you do something that is excellent because that's who you are and what you believe in. And so to me, it's about activating students from that point of view and actually letting the students themselves recognize excellence in themselves and each other and be motivated by what simply motivates them to be excellent, which is things you actually care about and things where you actually have a deep, deep need for excellence when you're surrounded by things that are not excellent. And so for me, rather than have someone from outside evaluate you and say you're good or bad, one of the biggest tasks of that class has been to come up with strategies that activate the students' sense of fineness and achievement. So to give a simple example of, the strategies of that, the class that we did on the food movement a few years ago, I think the final paper question was to discuss ways in which your parents shaped your life by how they fed you. And then, in the second half of the paper, discuss how you intend to feed your children. Now, you can't get that paper off the internet. you actually have to write it yourself. And it's actually something that concerns you. And it's very real in your life. So if you cheat on that, who did you just cheat? Your kids. Makes no sense. So I try and set up something where people are motivated to do something because it does matter. And because the stakes are real and the stakes are high for what level of excellence you will bring and live with in your own life. Those are very, very high stakes. And if you can reach people that way, then they carry that excellence into everything they do. And that's really, really important. It's not you're only excellent when someone's watching, which is to me what the current system is about, is what you can get away with when someone's looking and what you can get away with when someone's not looking. And to my mind, if nobody's looking, how excellent are you? That's the question. That's the excellence you're carrying with you. You're born with it, and you have the finest sense of it, and you have to meet that and engage it every day. And I always try to explain to the students, when you're an artist, nobody tells you when you wake up in the morning you have to make great art. You're the only person who decides that. You just have to decide, you're going to spend this day and waste it, or you're going to spend this day and make something amazing that didn't exist on Earth 24 hours ago. Your choice. Nobody's giving you a grade. Nobody's holding a gun to your head. You just are alive, and what are you going to do with that? So to me, that's the depth of what those classes are about. And again, I would just emphasize, once you focus the class on real project activities, then the community itself creates the ethics that govern the project. And that's very, very powerful. Yes, over here.
Peter, I was a student in your class in Art as Moral Action during the 1992 LA uprising. And one of the things that I found so shocking about that event was the realization that there were many, many people living in my city who felt that they had so little stake in their own society that they went and burned down their own neighborhoods. And that was really shocking. Now, earlier you used the term enfranchisement. And I think at the end of the day, that's the whole point of teaching, especially in the arts. It's about self-enfranchisement. So I offer the name, the Institute for Creative Enfranchisement. That's my that's my offering.
Hi, Mr. Sellars. My name is Carlos Rogel, and I'm an alumni of the UCLA Arts Department. I did my undergrad here, and that was 6 years ago, I believe, 5 or 6 years ago. And in my time here, I struggled to find a way to apply my skills as a visual and digital artist, and combining that with my own personal history and community, working with community, until I found an apprenticeship with Professor Judy Baca and Spark, the Social and Public Art Resource Center. And in the last 6 years, I mean, I've been able to work with so many incredible artists, visual artists, performing artists, the whole gamut, and also to be able to teach university students through Beyond the Mexican Mural, which is a course in which 10 students are able to work in a laboratory like the one that you're describing, to create, through project-based learning, something that addresses an issue that they really feel connected with and concerned with. And the projects that have come out have been just astronomical. Like, the variation is incredible. the impact. We can begin to trace it now after 14 years of the laboratory being in existence. And this year, I was actually accepted into the Chicano Studies PhD program as the first cohort in visual arts. I'm finding that the faculty is supporting my efforts in producing a project-based, rather than a thesis, that it could be evaluated as a visual art project. But the current class that we're taking, myself and 6 others of the cohort, is community culture development at the lab. It's tutorial-based, it's project-based. We're going through the motions of essentially creating a miniature community, but now we're in the process of deciding what is the issue that we will be addressing. So it's in progress, but they're actually, these are efforts that have been undervalued by the larger university. And I believe that UCLA has this gem with the partnership with the Social and Public Art Resource Center and the Cesar Chavez Digital Mural Lab that could be expanded, could actually grow into a vision that you share, and I believe, and I know that you share with Professor Baca and so many other key core faculty members. But the transformation that we've seen in the last 4 weeks has been incredible, with students from anthropology, from critical cartography, social sciences. I mean, it's really special. You know, I just wanted to share that.
Congratulations. That's great to hear that. Really great, Carlos. Great. Thank you. And more power to you guys. And I would just really emphasize that, you know, working collaboratively is not new in the history of the world. You know, it's a lot is going on for a long time. And thank God for that. I do think it is something that needs to absolutely not just happen, as we said, at the edges. We now need to really regroup and redefine the center and no longer be an alternative, right? But really now say, this is what we're doing. You know, and I think the critical mass is building. And that's very, very exciting at this moment. I just want to create something at UCLA that that amplifies that and continues it. Yeah, absolutely. And when I say I really, again, I could just really emphasize it has to be created by a group. You know, that's the power of it, of course. And more power. Yes, over here. Here, first start here and then go there.
I'll be quick. I just wanted to say I'm so happy that you're talking about this, Peter. I took Peter's class years ago, and I took it again after that. And I fell in love with his class because of that sense of inclusivity that you give your students, and that whatever they can do is their best, and that you encourage us to find what that is really tremendous. Thank you.
Hi. I wanted to say a couple things. One is a name that I'm just going to pull it up here and read the definition. There's a word you may have heard of called Ubuntu. It's an African word, a humanist philosophy. And it means, there's different definitions, but one of them is, I am what I am because of who we all are. And Desmond Tutu explains it. He says, a person with Ubuntu is open and available to others, affirming of others, does not feel threatened, that others are able and good, based from a proper self-assurance that comes from knowing that he or she belongs in a greater whole, and is diminished when others are humiliated, or diminished when others are tortured or oppressed. One of the sayings in our country is Ubuntu, the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you can't exist as a human being in isolation. It speaks about our interconnectedness. You can't be human all by yourself. And when you have this quality, Ubuntu, you are known for your generosity. We think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals, separated from one another, Whereas you are connected and what you do affects the whole world. When you do it well, it spreads out. It is for the whole of humanity. And one suggestion is the Ubuntu Institute. I also, a lot of people have brought up youth and the importance of, and also inclusivity. And one thing I hope, I have a child who has profound disabilities, and he goes to a school that is fully inclusive here in the Valley, and it only goes through 8th grade. So I'm in the process of working with LAUSD to create a fully inclusive, project-based, true project-based social justice pilot school that is also service learning. So we work in the community all together, kids of all abilities, and arts is a huge proponent of part of that. And it's a public school. We're trying to work with LAUSD, and funding is always the issue. It just has been a few months, but it's exactly in line with what you're hoping to do with your institute, and I would love to talk to you more even about that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, Lucas, you're over there. It's incredible. It's amazing you don't have to throw that mic out. You can just replace the battery. Incredible.
May I humble ask you to consider another word instead of institute? I think it's a tainted word. I think it's a hierarchical word. I think that if we, as I hear the word community, I think more like village. I think like the Ubuntu village could be one.
Gee, I'm just such a product of the 80s where we were all taught institutional thinking, and we're just, institutions are more important than people. But I'll try and think about people now. That's incredible. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, who was? Well, we've been going on forever. Please excuse me for being so long tonight. Is there a sense of this? Do people think this is worth doing? Is there anybody who's irritated? Again, lots of people are doing very exciting things all over the country. And I want to emphasize, for me, the UCLA component is also about bridging a gulf between two things. One of which is I went to Harvard, which from an era when all the best people knew each other and then were wired into the system for the rest of their lives. Thank God that's over. But it means that all the best people don't necessarily know each other. And so one of the tasks is convening people, bringing people together who haven't met and wouldn't meet. And that, to me, is a really, really important task. The other side is that UCLA does and is increasingly having a certain visibility and a certain prominence, which could be important, but also at a certain moment where the most important works of art are actually being made in a non-important way. That is to say, people are turning their backs on importance. And as I said earlier, recognizing the future is going to be made by people who are not important now. And if you're just cultivating the important donor, you're actually missing the entire future. And so, for me, a lot of the most important artwork now is in the DIY category, right? A whole generation of artists are making things with no money, and in fact, refusing to have money be any part of it. And maybe I just mentioned quickly the project of a young artist named Sean Starwitz in Kansas City, who's really making a whole series of artworks in Kansas City. They're raising money by, of course, feeding people and creating meals and creating occasions and creating gatherings. One of their projects was to go in dumpsters across the city of Kansas City and find broken furniture and then rehab it as artists, making sculptural pieces and making one-of-a-kind artists' furniture. And then they opened a storefront on a street in Kansas City that divides black and white Kansas City, basically. And for their furniture store, and you could not use money to purchase anything in the store. You had to barter, and you had to decide what that was worth in whatever you could offer. And to me, those gestures, which are these small gestures, but they're actually very, very powerful, you know, that is different from raising money for the big performing arts center. This is a really different set of priorities, a different set of possibilities to regroup and reseed and reroute democracy. Exchange, value, shared space, shared possibilities, and solve things creatively rather than say, this can only be solved by money. But actually say money can't solve this. And we need to solve a bunch of things that money can't solve. At the same time, that's a really great preparation for what I think UCLA is good at, which is ultimately it will have to become legislation in the California legislature or in Congress. And so, to me, to keep both streams moving at the same time is to have the reseeding process of making democracy real again, so you could taste it, and at the same time to continue to have an institutional support that when the moment comes can flip that up to become the next legislation. That is really important to have both tracks moving. And to me, that's one of the tasks right now, because so many arts institutions are only able to function at one extreme or the other. And we're now in a period where the arts have no middle class left. And we have either people with nothing or people with, you know, too much. And can we now trace a different set of paths forward and have them converge at a future point? So, yes. Oh, thank you, thank you.
Hey, Peter. I'd like to just remind us of some key things that you have taught us so well. One is about our city and working in our city, whereas for those of you who don't know me, I've spent all of my life practically here at UCLA, but the most rewarding was when we were out there in the communities, in the neighborhoods, finding those rooms to have those gatherings, and to take us off this campus is probably one of the most valuable things. You know, in the LA Festival, 1990, the city was ours, all of it. Every corner of it was encompassed in the festival. And we didn't feel alien. That kind of constant movement throughout the city would be key, I think. And to then, I really want to take you at your word that we're talking about the people of our community. Not the elitists, not the people who are going to make that top tier of famous people that the LA Times are going to want to talk about. They should be there, but they need to be in the mix. And they need to be part of the listening group as well as teaching. So this kind of creating the equilibrium so that we can hear the voices of people as they're speaking in their own neighborhoods to people from other neighborhoods, but also that they are listening. So I see a transformation kind of thing if we're talking about long term, and it will take a long time. But we see people organizing and gathering together a lot in our city. We see our farmers markets. Perfect place to be able to have gatherings of people, because the right-minded people, and they're all over our city. So to not try to recreate the wheel, but know that there are book groups, there are political groups, there are all kinds of organizing going on in the city, but to organize it around a set of ideas that are guiding people maybe parallel through all the different neighborhoods in our city. Maybe you have 30 meetings on the same night with a different configuration at each place. Over time, maybe they're only once a month, but over 2 or 3 years, you know, obviously the real trick is if people keep coming, then we've got something going. And if they don't, then it's kind of a natural attrition that will occur. But to create a model that is consistent with how people are living in the places they're living, I think is one of our greatest values. I would like to think that since 1990, the city has gotten better. I am sad to say I do not believe that is so. I don't believe that we are more aware of our neighborhoods than we were in 1990. And it pains me to admit that. But what happened there in 1990 was the circulation. And we need more circulation, and bring it into this field of ideas, I think would be a brilliant and important thing for a city like ours, and to be a model for what other things can happen.
Thank you for stating that so beautifully. I think genuinely Chancellor Block is committed to UCLA playing a role in LA, and has already done this big technological program that's moving through large corridors of the city. And I would like to think we could have a cultural dimension now that would really intensify and extend that. And it's called University of California, Los Angeles. And the Los Angeles part is actually crucial, of course, because the laboratory is the city. And at the same time, again, what is bizarre in this, so much synthetic entertainment reaches the world from here that actually misrepresents what this place is. And so starting with this place is really crucial. And also, if I could emphasize students getting off campus, I mean, as much as I love, this is my favorite golf course university, but getting away from the manicured lawn here is the most crucial thing to being a person, you know, and to design programs that really insist that people are off this campus and make a point of it is absolutely necessary. And again, that the learning is taking place in very different sets of relationships of, it's not just what you can convince the teacher of. As Judy says, how do you convince somebody in East LA of that? Whatever it is you're saying or thinking. You know, you have to hold yourself open. You have to be responsive. You have to be tested. And everything needs to be tested in real world. And that's really important. And again, the final word of democracy at a true on the ground, you know, and not just as a think tank. And we've specialized in think tanks, and think tanks are great at self-promotion and at creating a certain type of presence, but it still is minus the actual day-to-day engagement, which is the final test and should be the beginning. Not just the final point, but the beginning. Again, I think those are skills for the next generation of students that are just crucial life skills, you know, in addition to just what it means to be human. And if we can make that a priority, thank you, Judy, because you made it a priority. And we have to carry on. Oh my gosh, 2 more people and then we should release you all into the night, right?
I want to amend my recommendation for a title. The Institute for Creative Change.
Whoa. People heard that, yes. Okay, good. Institute for Creative Change. And Ken. Yes.
If we go back and pick up our car and we didn't have enough time, are we going to get a ticket? This is really down to the community level now. Does anybody know?
You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Or can you
Listen, hey everyone, may I just say thanks for coming out tonight, and let's keep going. Right? All of us. All of us. All of us. Thank you all. Thank you a lot. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you.